So today we're going to talk about a subfield of it's a mix between water and geology. It's called medical geology. And it basically is how does rocks and minerals and things inside of it really impact your soil, impact your health. So it could be good. We'll talk about some of the good ones, like fluoride is a good one. And we'll talk about some of the bad ones. And we've already mentioned some of the bad ones. And so this is just some other ones that would be interesting for people to learn about. The health of yourself can be influenced by where you live. You could have radon in your basement. We'll talk a little bit about that in the future. We'll talk about our radon in our basements, but also our radium in our water. That is just caused by the geology in there. And sometimes this is influenced by the anthropogenic activities, where as we do things, we can be putting in more waste into there. We could be, making the problem worse in there. So we'll talk a couple things, and this is just something to keep in mind when you're looking at these type of issues is what is toxicology versus epidemiology. Sometimes these words are used interchangeably, and they're not. Toxicology is a study of toxins, so how does substances, impact the human body, but it's more of affects the whole. So you can see population as a whole, not individual. While epidemiology is a study of epidemics, so it's a statistical occurrence of a disease, how often does it happen, how often, more risk assessment associated with this. So when I talked about Woburn, Massachusetts, that was an epidemiological study. If I just talk about TCE and the environment and how that toxin impacts people, that's toxicology. So these two things are related to each other, but they are different disciplines. So what we're going to do is look at some different elements inside of the periodic table of elements. We do need some things for health, and we're going to be talking about things we don't that are bad for our health, but we're also going to talk about some good ones. And I always like to show this one. I'm going to move. I don't know if I can move me. Let's see. So this is a really important thing, is the dose response curve, and this kind of explains everything when it comes to a lot of this here, is that sometimes we need a little bit of things, like copper. We need a little bit of copper in our lives, a little bit of nickel. But then if you don't have any in your life, and we'll talk about iodine. I've talked a little bit about iodized, salt that you take in. That could be harmful to your health if you don't have any. If you don't have any iodine, you'll get goiters. You could actually be, if you've nothing in it. At some point, you start to receive some benefit from it, and increasing amounts of it will give you more benefit, but at some point it just kind of levels off. You can keep adding more and more, and you don't get any benefits, and then you're going to hit a point where you're actually going to see decreasing the more you add into your body, and at some point it becomes very toxic, and you can actually kill yourself from that. And so this dose response curve kind of explains a lot of things. So arsenic, there is no healthy level of it, so you'll always be, there is no point where it crosses over. But some things you do need a little bit of it, and too much of it causes bad things. So a lot of times when we take in these different minerals and stuff, if it's too much, we may pee it out. So this is, I mentioned multivitamins. We have to mine. So if you go back to think about our mineral resources section of the class, when we're mining things, we have to mine them. We put them into our bodies. If our bodies don't want them, we pee it right out. Or if we get to too high levels and you're taking more than what the recommended dosage is, it can actually become toxic for you. So we're going to do a couple examples showing off this dose response curve. So the first one we're going to talk about is fluorite. It is the state mineral of Illinois. So fluorite, it's found down in the southern part. You can see where it is down in the southern part of the state, where we actually have some fluorite mines. Geologically, the most important place that this really happens is what are called phosphorite rocks. So phosphorite, if you see this word phosphorite, what does it kind of look like? Phosphorus. So this is also found where we mine phosphorus. So where we get our phosphorus for our drinking water, for our plants and to grow, we're also getting out fluorite at the same time. And so it is the most abundant. And where do we find that in the world? Well, this is where geologically it's found. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this problem we have down in central Mexico. I'll talk about some research that some NIU students had done down in there, and an issue down in central Mexico. But you can see that fluorite is a big problem in a lot of different parts of the world. It's wherever they have phosphorite rocks. We get a lot of our phosphorus in this country from the rocks that are coming from this particular area here. Phosphorus can be also a problem of certain places like Wisconsin. Again, I try to find these things of Illinois and I have problems, but Wisconsin's great about getting all their data out there. And so those same areas where we looked at arsenic issues is the same area here, which also has high concentrations of fluoride inside of it. So fluoride can be found naturally in a lot of different settings around the world. So what do we use fluoride for? Well, one of the things we use it for is, on our toothpaste, keeps our teeth strong. What it does there is it exchanges the OH groups that are on our teeth with the fluoride, and so it makes them stronger. And so decreasing cavities, we'll talk about that as a public health. Actually, as bottled water increase, that means less fluoride, and so we're actually seeing more cavities happening in people because we don't have that benefit from increasing fluoride inside of our water. But fluoride is also used in lubricants, refrigerants, fluorine gas, CFCs. Have you ever heard of CFCs? Chlorofluorocarbons. That's inside of there. It's used for fluxing and refining iron ore, so we use it for a lot of other things. One of the big issues, though, with fluoride is the concentration of it. So we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about concentration of it, but right now the MCL, or maximum contaminant level for fluoride in drinking water in the United States, is 4 parts per million, or 4 milligrams per liter. The health effects of it are really seen anything above 2. 1.5 to 2 is a healthy range, but anything over that is you start to see bad problems, and I'll show you some fluorosis into there. Our MCL is set way too high, and we'll talk about that controversy in a second. But first, what I wanted to talk about was a project I did with incorporating undergraduate studies and examining fluoride and arsenic issues in groundwater in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. So this is in central Mexico. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that we did down there with Engineers Without Borders and the social entrepreneurs in there. So first of all, where are we at? Well, we're in the San Miguel de Allende and the Independence Aquifer, which here is Mexico City. We are up in the state of Guanajuato, and we're looking at the Independence Aquifer. So this is the name of the aquifer that's in this area. This is where Mexican independence occurs, so there's a lot of historic areas up in that area. And so it's the Independence Aquifer. And so there's some famous churches in the area that are very interesting to go to. But this particular area has a lot of water issues. This is a community group that had built the Independence Aquifer in 3 dimensions so that we could see the mountains and see where the valleys, the recording in there. One of the interesting things for us that we'll talk about is a lot of times like broccoli. Remember we talked about what's the worst one for water use? Broccoli, remember that? A lot of broccoli is grown in this region. A lot of Mexican, it's really not consumed by anybody in Guanajuato. The broccoli is not consumed by anybody in this region. It is all for export to the United States. And so broccoli is grown in this, and it's very, very water intensive. And so what is happening in this Independence Aquifer is that they have all these pozos, or wells, that they are pumping all the groundwater up to water all of this very highly intensive. They're also growing alfalfa, which is also very water intensive in this area. And so their water tables, and we talked about decreasing water tables and water levels going down, they're going in 5 to 10. They've gone about 1 meter to 2 meters a year and decreasing in water because there's no recharge. This is a very dry location. It's very warm, but it's very, very dry. They get very little rainfall in this region, yet we are growing some of the most intensely watered products in the world in this region. And so next time you buy broccoli and it's coming in from Mexico, think about where it's coming from. And one of the issues that they're having in that area is fluoride and arsenic problems. So here's our Independence Aquifer again. In Mexico, the legal limit is 1.5 milligrams per liter. Again, like I said, the United States is at 4. And we'll talk about some of the historic reasons for that. But the legal limit in the country of Mexico is 1.5. Throughout this Independence Aquifer, you can see the different concentrations of it going up to 18. So very bad problems with their water supplies. Even this is down in San Miguel. They do get a lake over in here. San Miguel de Allende has a lake in here that they drink water out of, but they actually have very high levels of fluoride. There's also arsenic in the water too, but we're going to center on fluoride. So what did we do? We went out and we did water testing in different areas. And so we would go out to the wells, the pozos, we would sample the water in there, and then we would have the water sampling locations throughout the area. And so we would work with the community groups. A lot of times electricity wasn't on in a town, so we couldn't get the pumps to work. We would have to come back when the electricity was turned on for that particular city. They would go periods of time without having access to any water because the pumps would be shut off. The city had a pump, but no electricity to run anything. And so we're going to talk about this particular area here in a second. So one of the towns I wanted to talk about, and that's the one that's in the background here. So you can see here is the new government installed well. Back over here behind them is the historic well that they used to get their drinking water from. And so I'm going to talk about these two wells. I just wanted to give you guys a sense of how close they are to each other. So we're in Ex Hacienda de Jesus. It's a community that dug their first pozo. So here is their pozo, their well right here, back in 1884. And what they would do is they had a wheel on here, and they would have, they could wheel this up and down using animals or people. This is the well itself, and so you can see all the people standing there. They would move these things out of the way, and they could drop a bucket down in order to get to their water. But this could be, it was open to the atmosphere, even though if they put these like lids on top of it, it still was open. And so they had an E. coli problem. So they would have bacteria in their water because it was so close to the surface. But the thing is this well always provided water. They could always get the water out of this very historic well, and it was also very low in fluoride. It did not have fluoride problems. It did not have arsenic problems inside of it. But the government came in and built them this brand new well that was right over here, and you can see the difference between the two distance. And the new well has fluoride at 18 parts per million. Remember, the legal limit for Mexico is 1.5. And this has 18, and the arsenic levels are at 600 parts per billion, and 20 is the legal limit for, in Mexico, the legal limit is 20 parts per billion of arsenic. So the well that the government was giving to them it's also very high temperature, because if we talk about, remember we talked about plate tectonics and geothermal water, same thing coming back here. The reason why this is so high is area here is having geothermal waters. And so that water, if you remember that section from the beginning of the class, that water brings those minerals into the water. And so the new government water is poisoning the people with high levels of fluoride and arsenic, while the old well had E. coli in it, so it caused some bacterial problems, but didn't have the toxic parts of it from these things. Easy to remove bacteria. Boiling water, there's filters for it, very inexpensive to remove E. coli. To remove fluoride and arsenic, it's very expensive. You're talking reverse osmosis. I'm going to show you some of the things we were trying to do in a second. So we went around and we would go to different homes around the thing, and we would test their water supplies and find out their levels of arsenic and fluoride for them and get the results out to the communities, and so they would know where their problems were. And then we worked with a local NGO, a nonprofit, or a non-governmental organization in the region, and we created these things you see in the background, these clay filters. And so what we were trying to do is look at using these clay filters to remove E. coli, but could we come up with something to remove fluoride? And one of the things we were looking at is what's called bone char. So it's kind of like a Brita filter, but except you're using like beef bones or bones inside of there instead of coconut, which is what you use in a normal Brita filter. This would use a bone, and then we would do a couple filter steps because, as you know, same thing as our teeth. So the fluoride would get bound to the bone material inside of there. So we were looking at that. When we finished up this project, we had done a lot of community testing for the communities. I would send a letter to each of the communities. And then the NGO here with Dylan would then take, and he ran with the filters and now comes up with a whole filter system that they sell to these local communities. They get the bone char from local butchers, get the bones from them. They make their own, they have the kilns there to make the clay filters and to char the bones. So much more of a high profit or a higher amount of money given to the locals for creating filters and creating bone char than for making bricks, because bricks you're getting less than a cent per brick. And so it was a way to help the community clear up their problem and still work with local products. So it was a really fascinating project we had done working down there. So what are some of the controversies with fluoride? Well, fluoride can be viewed as a double-edged sword. So first of all, there's the dental benefits, like I mentioned, decreasing cavities. However, if you go over that dose-response curve and you're going up too high, you start to have major health problems. You'll start off with white spots on your teeth. You'll start to develop fluorosis, it can be crippling inside of there. When we go into these communities, I got to the point where I would see the women sitting there, because it's just women left in these towns. The women would be sitting there and they'd smile, and I could see the spots on their teeth. And I would be like, oh, okay, I can figure out the concentration based upon how their teeth were. Then the teeth start to turn brown, and then they really start to try to cover them up. And so I could figure out the levels of fluoride just based upon looking at the people's mouths. And so should we even be drinking water with it? Well, a little bit is good. Too much, bad. Really bad. So never eat toothpaste. Okay. So the concentrations we picked in the United States is 4 milligrams per liter. Well, why do we have 4 milligrams per liter? But I keep telling you, like Mexico's 1.5, and if you go above 2, it's really toxic. That what happened was back in the WHO back in 1971 did this study, and they found that any level between 1.5 and 4 prevented tooth decay, and above 4 caused dental fluorosis. So the United States put it at 4 so that communities didn't have to try to remove it. So there was a lot of communities that already had high levels of fluoride because of geology of the area. This is a geology-based lecture. So those areas already had high levels of fluoride, and they didn't want to have to treat to get it down. And they said, well, it's good anywhere in this range over here, so what's the problem? Well, come to find out that really this 1.5 is the hot number up to 2, and then anything between 1.5 and 2 is good. But anything lower than above 2, you really are getting into this dental fluorosis. And so we really need to change our MCL, but, we got other things going on right now. The other controversy with fluoride that comes on, so if you ever go online and look up fluoride, is they're like, well, we're putting fluoride in the water and this is toxic, and people having to wear PPE in order to be able to handle the toxic. Well, like anything, too much of something is bad for you. So you have to wear protective equipment for a lot of things in there. So it's not just that you have to wear PPE when you're handling the fluoride, so it must be toxic, and it's just, again, that idea of too high a concentration. Anything too much is bad for you. The other thing that is a problem with fluoride, as I mentioned before, is where do we get the fluoride from? Phosphorus rocks. What are we using that phosphorus for? Agriculture. So this is an agricultural byproduct. So as we're making a fluoride or phosphates to be putting onto our agricultural systems, we're creating fluoride as a byproduct of that, and instead of just dumping it, we're going to use it for something. So that's where this comes in. Fluoride, it does, the teeth by replacing the OH groups on the bones to create apatite in there, and so it makes for stronger teeth. Osteoporosis levels are lower with people who have fluoride in there, but again, right concentrations in the fluoride. Again, we start to see health benefits, curves and stuff. If we stay down at this end, we're really good. If we get too high for fluoride, even cattle who have been seen to eat really high levels of fluoride will start to develop fluorosis. You can get skeletal problems, a lot of health problems from fluoride. So how did we start using fluoride inside of our water? Well, what happened was in 1945, the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan, just on the other side of Lake Michigan, was the first city to treat all of its water. It was seen as a public health. So what they said was, well, if we put this very inexpensive thing that costs about 50 cents per person per year to add fluoride to the water, we can see dental cavities decreasing, and we can do this massive public health thing. People, if you look at the controversies of this, think that it's for mind control, all these other. No, it's put in there to control cavities. Crest toothpaste was the first toothpaste to add fluoride to their toothpaste in order to help you with your dental problems in 1956. They were using a tin fluoride compound. Nowadays, we use mostly sodium fluoride as our toothpaste. They originally were using a tin fluoride, and so today, a lot of cities fluoridate their water. In the state of Illinois, if your levels are anywhere between 0.5 and 1.5 parts per million of fluoride, you don't have to add any fluoride. If your water is less than 0.5, then you have to add some to get it up to that range. So in the state of Illinois, we're very conscientious about that. And so cities like the city of Elburn, which is not too far away from here, they're right in that range. They don't have to add fluoride to their water. If you drink a lot of bottled water, again, you're not getting this fluoride. So more than 72% of the Americans have access to fluoridated water. And so if they treat the water, they'll see it, and they see decreasing tooth decay problems inside of that. I won't keep this up for too long. This is what fluorosis looks like, very mild. You start to see the white, and then when you start to get really bad, you start to get this brown color in there. And so what we'd like to do is keep these white spots from happening, the white happening, and then finally into the fluorosis problems into it. And as I mentioned before, this was phosphorite is where we're getting this, and so this is a byproduct from that. And so this is the product that we're using inside of our drinking water supply. Toothpaste is different. We use sodium fluoride inside of there. Tin fluoride was the first one that was used by Crest. They don't use that anymore. I looked it up. I was like, oh, they use tin. And then I buy Crest, and they use the cheaper version of it. Just to give you an idea that most toothpaste sold in the United States have between 1,000 and 1,100 parts per million fluoride. Don't eat toothpaste. It's got very, very high levels. Spit it out. Don't swallow any of that toothpaste. You'll get too much fluoride inside of your system in there. How do we remove it from the water? Well, we can remove it from water by using reverse osmosis. So we could use activated alumina. But the problem with reverse osmosis, and it gets rid of everything from your water. So if you want to have a good water, we talked about lead, reverse osmosis. You want to talk about anything? Reverse osmosis. We'll remove it. But about 13.5 gallons of water is wasted for every 1.5 gallons produced. So you increase your amount of water consumption, and you produce a lot more wastewater inside of there. So it can cause problems, but if this is an issue for you, you can also do ion exchange. So in there, lining, and then I had mentioned the bone char as a way of doing this. And so there are commercial bone chars that are out there and systems that can in there. The problem with bone char, though, is once you use it, it really makes the water taste funky. And so usually you have to do some other filtering afterwards in order to remove it. It's not like the Brita filters where the water tastes better afterwards. This usually has a taste to it, and so you have to do some additional filtering, but locally found. So that is fluoride, one of the big ones for us.